As I said many times before, in the polls, the opposition Labour Party is far ahead of the governing Conservative Party. With the appointment of David Cameron as Foreign Secretary, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who is under pressure, has certainly achieved a coup, because this bold move suggests the outlines of the strategy with which the British Conservatives will enter the 2024 election year. But what will he achieve with this personal decision? And is it risky or not? And what will the party focus on? And will they ever get rid of the 20% behind Labour? Or will the torturous process continue for the ruling party in low polls until the election? As I said, the next general election in the UK must be held no later than January 2025. And until then, the Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Act allows the Prime Minister to call new elections at any time. And this is generally expected to occur in October or November 2024. Some people are speculating about spring 24, but I really do not see this, because the background to the calculation 10 Downing Street would be to set the election date as late as possible. And while they're still hoping that, above all, the economic situation will improve in the course of 2024 and give the government with this new scope for tax cuts and reducing burdens. British economic development is stagnating after the triple shock of Brexit, COVID, and the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. And at the same time, the burden of the population caused by the high cost of living remains enormous. And they really need every second they can put on until the election to get as much done as they hope until it really happens. So I think it's at the end of 24. Nevertheless, it can be heard from the party headquarters in London, the Conservative campaign headquarters, that they are prepared for any eventuality. If Sunak's team comes to the conclusion that the economic situation will not change significantly enough by autumn 24, or even assumes a recession in the second half of the year, the election could take place as early as spring. Since there are local elections across the country in May anyway, both dates could be combined in order to avoid the party going into the crucial general election with a prospect of a possible disastrous local election result before that. The opposite case, for example, if the relief announced by Finance Minister or Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt on November 22nd as part of the autumn statement, results in a trend reversal, that could speak in favor of the earlier round of voting. And this scenario is currently not the most likely, but it cannot be ruled out either. In any case, it was said that the Conservative chief strategist Isaac Levido, who was already campaign manager of the successful election campaign in 2019, will be moving from the government headquarters at 10 Downing Street to the CCHQ on January 1st. By then, at the latest, everything will be geared towards the election campaign. The main political problem for the Conservative Party under Rishi Sunak is that the party has not emerged from the massive structural poll deficit even after he took office in October 22. He failed to bring his party's poll numbers, which initially fell from 40 to 33% as a result of Boris Johnson's Partygate scandal, and then collapsed to 22% during the weeks of chaos under Liz Truss, and he didn't manage to get them into Labour's reach again. Since then, the Tories' poll ratings have ranged between 23 and 29%, putting them a significant 20% behind Labour, who have since achieved approval ratings of around 45%. If this were the basis of the election outcome, projections suggest that the Conservative parliamentary group in the lower house would be dramatically reduced from the current 350 seats to 150-200 seats. A series of lost by-elections confirmed this trend, and for example in October, the Tories lost the Mid-Bedfordshire and Tamworth constituencies, which had been in Conservative hands since 1931 and 1996, respectively. But it would not be fair to blame the situation solely on Rishi Sunak. In contrast to his three predecessors, he brought seriousness and reliability back into British government policy. The fundamentally improved basis of trust, also with the European partner countries, made it possible to conclude the important so-called Windsor framework with the EU and to calm the debate about the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was damaging for all sides. Well, the only ones that don't shut up are the DUP. However, the massive credibility deficit among large parts of the British population towards the Tories is obviously too serious. In his first few months as Prime Minister, Sunak found it difficult to set any substantive priorities, as he repeatedly had to deal with the unpleasant legacies of the Johnson era or with the misconduct of individual Tory MPs. Overall, after 13 years of government, the Conservative Party appears drained in terms of content and, in some cases, personnel. The fact that around 50 members of the 350-strong Conservative parliamentary group in the lower house have already declared that they no longer want to run in the next elections is emblematic. And that doesn't speak for confidence in victory. Another reason for the weak polls is the party's lack of unity. It is difficult for the party leadership to move forward with clear substantive lines, as a large number of internal party interest groups and ad hoc associations pursue their own policies. This was clearly visible at the party conference in Manchester in October, where new groups such as the New Conservatives or the Conservative Growth Group, which consisted mainly of supporters of the previous governments, partly determined the media coverage. However, the clearly emerging declaration of war by former Home Secretary Suella Braverman forced Sunak to act. Three factors could now have motivated Sunak to act. Firstly, in recent weeks and months, the impression had grown that Braverman, as Home Secretary and therefore a high-ranking member of the government, could not be tied to the cabinet's common line. She had already been fired by Liz Truss for lack of discipline in handling confidential information. And second, the party base doesn't seem to be behind Braverman to the extent she likes to suggest. According to the Conservative Home Portal, Braverman is only in fourth place and almost 30 percentage points behind the most popular cabinet member. And that is the previous Secretary of State James Cleverly, her successor in office now. Her path to the party leadership would be anything but assured. However, the third and probably decisive factor seems to have been the fact that the elections are due in a year at the latest, and therefore an internal revolt is no longer to be expected. Sunak therefore seemed to have come to the conclusion that he had sufficiently consolidated his internal party position after a year as Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party. Even Braverman and the Tory MPs who leaned towards her would not dare to split the party in the crucial months before the election. A cabinet that no longer represents the party in all its diversity but is 100% behind the Prime Minister is, according to Sunak's calculations, the decisive prerequisite for a successful election campaign. The contrast with Braverman's successor could hardly be greater. James Cleverly, whose professionalism and seriousness were generally recognized in the Foreign Office, has now taken Braverman's place at the head of the Home Office. And this personnel change would be remarkable in itself. However, the appointment of former Prime Minister David Cameron as Foreign Secretary overshadowed even this decision. Cameron resigned in 2016, just hours after the Brexit referendum was announced, because his credibility had been permanently damaged following the lost referendum campaign. While the media's assessment of Cameron's return to the cabinet ranged from critical to mixed, there is no doubt that the Prime Minister has achieved a coup with his personnel decision. Nobody expected the former head of government to be appointed. He is the first foreign minister since Lord Carrington, that was 79 to 82, who does not have a seat in the British House of Commons. In order to make this appointment possible, Sunak had his predecessor elevated to the nobility by King Charles III and made a member of the parliamentary upper house, the House of Lords. Responsibility for the destabilizing Brexit referendum undoubtedly cast a shadow over Cameron's time in office. There's also justifiable criticism of some of his foreign policy decisions at the time with regard to China, Syria, and Libya. In terms of domestic policy, the former Prime Minister is accused by the opposition of saying that his austerity policies have reduced the effectiveness of the British state and increased regional inequalities. In addition to this baggage, there's a lobbying scandal in which he was involved after his term in office ended. While this leaves Lord Cameron open to a certain degree of attack, there are valid reasons for his appointment. As an exceptional political talent, he has a wealth of experience and prestige like hardly any other living Tory politician. He did not need any training period for his new position in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. He carried out his first business trips to Ukraine and the Middle East as if he had never been away. With Lord Cameron in the Foreign Office, James Cleverly in the Home Office, and the equally experienced Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor of the Exchequer, Prime Minister Sunak has now assembled a reliable team around him to fight the upcoming election campaign. At the same time, all owners of these great offices of state promise to rally behind Sunak as team players and support him in the current difficult situation. Home Secretary Cleverly will be able to make great use of his experience in the Foreign Ministry in combating illegal migration and dealing with social polarization as a result of the war in the Middle East, especially since the boundary between foreign and domestic policy is now more volatile than ever. And Chancellor of the Exchequer Jeremy Hunt proved at the recent presentation of the Autumn Statement that he was sending the right signals with new financial relief for people despite limited fiscal leeway. A spontaneous poll by YouGov after the Autumn Statement found a 4% increase in support for the Tories. Although this is of course only a snapshot, it shows how helpful the personality of the Chancellor of the Exchequer is, who is based right next door to the Prime Minister at 11 Downing Street. Sunak also used the recent cabinet reshuffle to fill important positions in the wider government with familiar people. Above all, it is those women who were only elected to the House of Commons in 2019 and who have professional experience as political advisors and communicative talent. The main ones to be mentioned here are Claire Coutinho, the former close advisor to Sunak at the Treasury, now Energy Secretary, or Laura Trott, who has already worked for David Cameron and has now been given the influential post of Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and Laura Ferris, who worked for Hillary Clinton in the United States and is now Parliamentary State Secretary for Victim Protection and Violence Prevention. In this context, the influential conservative weekly magazine The Spectator wrote of a Rishification of the ruling party. It also makes it clear that in the months before the election, Sunak is understandably not only concerned with keeping political promises, but also with better selling the government's work. Whether the Prime Minister will still be called Rishi Sunak in 2025 remains unlikely still. And if you want to see more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.